Hey guys, welcome back to Home Built, and this week we are buttoning up everything to get the engine back into Harry. Okay guys, I thought I would briefly cover some of the continual comments I got about the IMS videos I did on Archie just recently. There were lots and lots of comments that are all the same thing over and over again. I'll just cover a few of those things. Yes, I was very well aware of the Wheeler Dealers episode where they used that very, very expensive and, in my opinion, completely overkill bearing replacement, their oil-fed bearing. It's extremely expensive, and I think it's great. If you are super paranoid about the IMS bearing dying in your car, then go ahead. I think it is well and truly overkill, not necessary. This car is an early car. I don't know how well I covered it in the videos, but there's three different types of sort of engines, really, main types of engines that have this issue. There's the early cars that had a dual row bearing that's more robust. Then they went, for some reason, the Series 2 cars pretty much have the single row bearing. So the single row bearing is the one which had the most failures, because obviously it's the smallest, the weakest of the bearings that the factory put in there. And then the later cars, I believe the early 997s, had a larger single row bearing that's probably the most robust. I've heard of the least issues with the 997s. It does happen. There's freak accidents happen with all of them, but the bulk of the issues, I think, was with the middle ones. It has happened with all of them. I'm not that paranoid about it, to be honest. I'm going to run it, and I'm actually taking it on this big road trip next week. If it dies, it dies. But you can't live in fear, and you can monitor these things. If you start seeing any metal or anything in the oil, then definitely you've got a problem. But if you monitor it and keep an eye on it, I really don't think it's as big an issue as what people are absolutely paranoid about. So, all right, just a couple other things. Getting the bearing out with paper or grease or whatever, packing into the center of the bearing and then pressing into it, works on some blind bearings that particularly like sort of pilot bearings on the end of a crank. In the IMS case, it is a big hollow tube all the way behind it that goes the entire length of the engine. So you're not going to pack that. If you do, you're packing it with heaps of stuff to try and push the bearing out. That's not going to work in this situation. The other suggestion, heat. Heat might have helped a bit, but basically in the single row bearings, they've got a circlip in front of the bearing. You have to take the circlip out first. Lots of people were commenting about that, oh, I didn't take the circlip out. The dual row bearings actually have a sort of a recess clip around the edge along the length of the bearing. So you've just got it's like a expanding wire that's in there. So it clips in when it's in, and you've got to just unclip it by pulling it out. That's the go with this one. So hopefully that covered a lot of the repeat questions that were given about this build. So let's get back onto important things, which is Harry, and let's start getting back in there and see what I'm going to do about putting this engine in. Okay, guys. So in the last episode, you saw that I bolted the gearbox back onto Harry. Some of you are mentioning about the gearbox mounts, and that is something I'm going to tackle right now. This whole bar is sort of pretty beaten up and looking a bit sad and sorry for itself. So I'm going to unbolt it off of the gearbox and see if we can give it a bit of a freshen up. All right, that is looking much nicer now. It's had a bit of a cleanup. It had layers and layers and layers of paint on it before, so now it's time to bolt this all back up again, and then we need to start looking at some gearbox mounts. Okay, so I think it's about time that we start talking about the suspension on this car. People have asked me whether I'm going to touch the suspension and upgrade the suspension, and the answer is yes, I am definitely going over and refreshing everything on the engine. Now, this might be another one of the controversial moves that I do on this car, but I'm actually putting everything back to stock. So I am replacing it with all basically standard parts to make the car back to what it was. The main reason for that is I'm not building a track car in this car. My original plans when I first got this car was that I was going to use it as a bit of a track day car, maybe even do some historic races in it. And then I realised what that actually cost, and realised that I can't afford to break these things. Like, just the gearboxes alone are, crazily expensive. So I decided that this car is going to be this will take some of the daily driving duties sometimes, and also be a road trip car, and it will see the occasional track day, but basically most of the time it's going to be a long road trip car. That's the plan for it. And as such, particularly with the roads around here, I don't think the crazy race suspension is great for it. I think often I find that softer, more standard suspension is actually, you can actually go quicker because you're actually the wheels are still touching the ground. They're not bouncing everywhere. It's not a smooth racetrack all the time. So that is where actually Pelican Parts has come to the party and helped out and supplied me with all of the stuff here. So I am very grateful to Pelican Parts, and I've got a link in the description and a list of the parts that I'm putting on it. But basically, I'm going over and replacing all the bushings and all of the shocks and everything with factory parts. So let's just have a look. It's got some, Bilstein shocks, and first things first is some engine and gearbox mounts. So first things first, we're going to get these out and start mounting up my gearbox mounts back up to the gearbox mount itself. All right, now the plan was to install these shocks, but I'm just having a look at the car now, and even though the shocks have been sort of painted black at some stage, I can actually see some red showing through. I was looking on Pelican's website, and it looks like there were two different options for the shocks on this model, and there's either the Bilstein shocks or the Coney shocks. And it looks like because the red is an indicator that they're actually Coney shocks, whereas these ones, the Bilsteins are green. So that's sort of a quick way to tell the difference. I checked front and rear, they're both Coneys all round. The other thing I have noticed, and I'm not sure, as I haven't pulled this apart yet, is the base of this shock. This is the rear shock here. The base of this shock is just, it looks like it's got a bolt or something sort of flat piece in it, but it's a flat base. Whereas, I'll take you down here now and I'll show you the bottom of the factory shock. And this is on the bottom of the factory shock, and a lot of them seem to have this sort of eye here that the bolt goes through. This is usually attached to the shock, and in the case of the new shocks, they finish there. So I don't know whether this bit unscrews off the bottom and the shock then mounts to it. I have no idea actually how that works. I assumed it would all be together as one piece, and that's not the case. So I'm going to have to do a bit more research. So I'm going to leave it for now, and I'm going to move on to installing the oil tank and oil line. All right, this is another thing that I have been sort of putting off for quite a while because I just didn't have much idea of how it all goes together. Basically, I took the oil tank out of the car when I pulled the engine out 4.5 years ago or whatever, and this car never originally had a front-mounted oil cooler. Although the later cars do and did, but this 74 model didn't. And that means that what I did is I actually bought from a wrecker all the lines to be able to do the front oil cooler. And as you may have seen in the first series, I fitted the oil lines down the side of the car. They're in there, but now I've got to do everything sort of connected up to that. First step though is to mount this oil tank back in the car. So I'm going to give it a good thorough clean out, and mount it back in the car, and then hopefully I can work out how to plumb this whole thing together. Okay, so now I've got the messy job of going through and cleaning out this oil tank. I'm going to just run a bit of diesel through it and sort of slosh it around with some diesel. Same with the oil lines, the old used oil lines. I'm going to just make sure they're nice and clean, and so there's no gunk that I'm going to be forcing through my engine before we put this back into the car. So let's start cleaning. Okay, I'm happy that's had a good clean out. It's been sitting on a shelf for 3 years, 4 years, whatever it is now. So now it's time to get it back onto the car and see if I can actually bolt it back in and work out where all these hoses go. And I just remembered that before I actually fit up the oil tank, I need to refit the oil level sender. So I got myself a new gasket. What do you call it? Cork gasket. So I'll reinstall that, reinstall the gauge and the level sender, and then put it on the car. All right, so what I'm trying to do on this car, I've added a front mount oil cooler. That's just to try and keep this thing running cooler. As many of you know, the 1974 to 1977 cars, the mid-year cars, were designed to run hotter because of the heightening emissions at the time in the US. So they ran them really hot, but it wasn't actually good for the engines and had all these engine issues. I am now adding a front oil cooler, which came standard in sort of the 911 SCs, I believe, and later. And I bought all of the factory oil lines a while ago, these ones that I've been cleaning up. Now I'm trying to work out how they actually go on the engine, and that is where I'm running into problems. This is one of the only ones I actually know how it connects up, so I'm going to put this one on first, and then we'll see if we can tackle the others. This one, basically, it bolts up to the engine on the other side down the bottom here, travels under this curve, travels underneath the gearbox, and then it comes out just here. So at least I can bolt this one up, and then we can start looking at what else I need to do. And of course, like everything on this build, it's not as easy as I thought. Just bolting this on, it looks like I have to drop the exhaust manifold because I can't actually get this pipe into the place while it's on there. So I'm going to have to drop the exhaust, bolt the pipe up and put the exhaust back on again. So everything's harder than it needs to be. All right, that's one oil line down. So there's obviously connecting to the engine, there's the oil line here, and also there's a breather just up here. Obviously in the original one, they've got the breather that goes to the inlet manifold. I may have to run a catch can or something else. I'll have to have a bit of a think about what I'm going to do as far as that goes. As far as connecting this stuff to the oil cooler that's at the front of the car already and the oil tank, let's go and have a look at what we've got there. So remember, we've got these two lines here. So back up under the wheel arch over here, we have the two lines coming out of the thermostat. So there's a thermostat there that lets the oil back all the way down to the front of the car, to the oil cooler, and then back out again. That's all there, and it's still where it's supposed to be. Now, this lower outlet here of the oil tank goes like this, and it goes into the other tube that's coming out of the oil cooler. So that one's good. Now, this pipe here, I believe, is the correct one to connect up to the thermostat, and it goes to the that crossover pipe that I just put in. So this bit here will bolt into the crossover pipe. So that one is sorted. The issue I have is the other pipe I got is this pipe here. Now this is too long for what I need, because I'm pretty sure that this pipe is actually supposed to bolt up to the thermostat where it's sitting there now, and this end is supposed to go into this fitting here. So this line is not the correct line. Now I'm going to have a look around, see what I can do. I might even see if I can talk to Raceworks, see if they've got something that might connect this up, and see if I can connect these two together, because this line is not going to cut the mustard. So here you can actually see these two pipes and where they actually end up. So this one here is flexible. This is supposed to end up somewhere around here where it actually bolts onto the crossover pipe. That one's in the right spot. That one's all good. This one here, as I said, I'm pretty sure, I'm basically certain it's supposed to bolt up to this oil tank here. What is this pipe from? It's off of a 911. It all fits, and it is quite an odd size. Let me know in the comments if anybody knows what this pipe is for and what pipe I actually need for this. I would be quite grateful to know that. Okay, so I was working down the back, and as you can see here, these are the oil cooler lines that run all the way along the side of the car. They're factory lines that I have I've mounted up again, and they came forward, and then I had to get some crazy weird fittings made up a couple of years ago. They had to actually custom make these because they couldn't, at least the place where I got these lines made, couldn't match up this this fitting size. So I got them made up, and these lines are the lines here going to the front oil cooler. And if I come down underneath the front of the car, you can actually see the oil cooler there sitting along, and I actually cut this front edge out. You can see here it's actually started to rust along this edge here because I didn't treat it. So I'm going to have to grind that back and treat that properly anyway. But at the time, I thought this would be enough space, but now that I actually have the hoses, the issue I have is that when I try and mount a hose up, it actually interferes with this panel here. So I'm going to have to just clearance that a little bit, just to make it so I can actually fit the oil cooler hoses back in there. Well, that definitely needed that. Yeah, a lot of rust and sparks later. Basically, I'd done all the welding, most of the welding from the inside of the car. I did a little bit down under here, but at the time I was doing it on jack stands. I didn't have a lot of access into the car, and there was a bit of a lip hanging down that I didn't, obviously didn't get around to treating. So now that I can actually see it, I can clean it up and treat it properly and repaint it so that it's not going to happen again. But before we start painting, let's work out where I need to put this this fitting and do some clever clearancing. All right, that was just quickly cleaned up, prime it up, and now I've got the Schutz gun out. I'm just going to give this a quick coat of Schutz, and that should seal it all in nicely, and then I can button this up for once and for all. Okay, and the last thing we need to do before we have the engine ready to go in is to install some new engine mounts, and that is a very simple matter of just bolting them in there like that, either side. Nice and easy. Let's bolt them in. Okay, we are finally up to the exciting bit. Next week, we are going to be bolting the engine back into the car. It has been a very long time. I'm excited to get to that stage. We'll see if there are any headaches along the way. Fingers crossed, we're good. The suspension, I'm obviously still going to have to tackle that. Check out Pelican Parts. They've got all the stuff ready to go that you need. I'll put a link in the description. Also, I keep noticing there are a lot of you who are watching the videos who aren't actually subscribed. Even though it doesn't mean a lot as far as revenue and stuff like that, it actually means something as far as marketing to other people. The more subscribers they see the channel has, the more deals I can do in the future to try and keep doing bigger and better things. So hit that subscribe button and like the video. Helps. It actually helps it get shared more. And if you want to watch them a day early, join us on Patreon. That really helps us out too. All right, guys. See you next time.